pastor as he comes to bring the word today.
Welcome to the sheep shed.
Yes.
I want you to do something for me. I want you to take your right hand and put it on your heart. Take your left hand and put it on your forehead. And say, Father, help me today, to open my mind and open my heart to receive your word. Now you said it. You better a minute. Because you're going to need it. We're going to talk about history of things to come. That ought to be, the title's interesting anyway. We're going to go to 1 Thessalonians in a minute. We live in exciting times. Jesus is coming back. We're living in the last days, and we are now the generation that is watching history of things to come. I want to read you from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. We're going to start at verse 16. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore, comfort or encourage one another with these words. Now don't stop reading. The Bible was not written in chapter and verse. It was a letter. Paul wrote a letter to the believers at Thessalonica. Chapter 5. But of the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write to you, for you know perfectly well that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. You are the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. Therefore, when you see a therefore, what do? Find out what it's there for. Therefore, let us not sleep. Don't get dull, unaware, as others do, but let us watch and be serious about what he's talking about. Verse 4 of chapter 5 is probably one of the most ignored, disbelieved verses in the Bible. God did not intend that the rapture, the second coming of Christ, take God's people by surprise. By the way, the word rapture is found nowhere in the Bible. It just simply means catching away. Now, for the unsaved, you're going to have to listen close. For the unsaved, Jesus is coming like a thief. They won't know he's coming. Thief never announces he's going to show up at a certain time. Hebrews 9:28 says, for those who look for him shall he appear the second time. It's really no surprise if you're looking for it. In Matthew 24, verse 36, Jesus is talking, he's answering a question that the disciples asked him when they said, what's going to be the sign of your coming? And he says, of the day and the hour knoweth no man, not the angels in heaven, nobody knows except my Father, which is in heaven. He's the only one that knows the day and the hour. Verse 42, he said, watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. He's watching now. He's put a limitation on it, a day and an hour. In Matthew 16, first 3 verses, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, He quotes to them an old fisherman's proverb. Red sky in the morning, sailor's warning. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. And then he looked at them and he said, you hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. So he expects us to discern the signs of the times. Did you get that? I'm going to throw you some curves today because it'll be contrary to most of what you've heard all of your life about the second coming of Jesus Christ. I want you to look at 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 and 2. But of the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write to you. For you know perfectly well that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. Now stop. He said, there's no need for me to tell you what you already know. You know the day of the Lord, the second coming, is going to come like a thief in the night. You cannot know the day or the hour, but we are expected to know the times and the seasons. But of the times and the seasons, you have no need that I write to you. You know that. But you know perfectly well that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night for those who are not saved. Now stay with me, please. Nobody knows the day or the hour, and anybody that sets a day and an hour for the Lord to come is a fool. But we are expected to know the times and the seasons. What does time mean? It's a year. Always translated as a year. When it says time, when he talks about the 3.5 years, the tribulation divided into two parts, 3.5 years, he says time is a year, times 2 years, that's 3.5 times, half a year. 3.5 years. So time is talking about the year, and it's talking about the time of the year and seasons. How many seasons in a year? 4 seasons. So he said you can know the time of the year, and you can know what season it is when he's coming back. Now that's what he said. God had no intention of slipping up on his people like a thief. Hebrews 10:25 says, talking about the last days when people who call themselves Christians are getting slack in their Christianity, in their faithfulness. He says, in the last days, don't you fall into the trap of letting yourself slip and fall away as you see the day approaching. But you encourage one another, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together as a manner of some is, and so much more as you see the day approaching. As you see, if you see it, it's not going to be a surprise, is it? Let me just stop a minute and ask you a question. How many of you right now, down deep inside, gut level, in your spirit, whatever you want to call it, you've had this nagging feeling that the day of the Lord, the second coming of Christ, is at hand? How many have had that feeling? We live in those times. He said, you know that. Now, it's going to happen. God is getting the bride of Christ ready to meet the bridegroom. Now, the world, the unsaved, going to be taken unawares. I do not believe anywhere in the Bible that it teaches that God's people have to be in the dark about the second coming of Jesus Christ. Every event of Daniel's 70th week. Now, Daniel gave us a clear picture of the 7 years of tribulation. It's called Daniel's 70th week. That's the 7 years of tribulation. They were calculated by God to begin and end at a specific point in time. Now, the only unknown factor is the day and the hour of Christ's return. Why? Because when he comes back, that is going to launch the world that's here into the 7 years of tribulation. And nobody knows the day or the hour that that's going to happen. You go through the Bible from front to back, and I can't find one place where God kept his people in secret or in the dark about when his wrath was going to be poured out on this earth. Not one time. God warned Noah, and Methuselah lived longer than any man on earth, but his father outlived him. His father was Enoch, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So he lived longer than Methuselah. Okay. Let me give you this little pointer. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him before the flood, before the disaster came. That's a type of the church. The church goes before the tribulation. Noah and his family was preserved through the flood. That's Israel. They're going to be preserved through the tribulation. But then what happened to all of those that were left? They all died. That's a type of what's going to be left behind. I think it's a pretty clear picture. God told Abraham that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham warned Lot. Every time, I'm not going to go through a whole list. There's a whole list of times that God warned the people, you better get ready. You better be aware. This is coming. He may not have told them exactly when, but he told them, you better be prepared. You better be aware, not get sleepy on it. Hebrews 10:25 says, as you see the day approaching. If you see it coming, it's not a surprise. 1 Thessalonians 5:4. He says, you are not in darkness that day should take you as a thief. No surprise. If you're not in the dark, you've got to be seeing what's happening. There's no surprise. Hebrews 9:28. For those that look for him shall he appear the second time. If you're looking for him, you're not going to be surprised. Now, you do not have to believe everything that I believe to be part of the sheep shed. You are not going to believe everything I believe. I believe some things you are not going to believe. You wouldn't believe it if I told you. And you believe some things that I will not believe. So we do not have to believe everything. But I promised you a long time ago that I would always tell you what I believe and why I believe it. The reason I do that, because I had a professor in college he was sharp. He was good. He was very good. He would give you every theory of everything about everything in the Bible. But when you tried to pin him down, well, what do you believe? He would not tell you what he believed, and that irritated the fire out of me. If you're going to tell me what everybody else believes, tell me which one you pick. Irritated me. I was as easily irritated then as I am now. I believe, now this is Mack. You don't have to believe this, but I think I can prove it. I believe that Jesus is going to come on the Feast of the Trumpets. Israel will blow the trumpet, the shofar, for 7 days. They would skip a day, and then they would blow the last trump, it's called. In 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 16 through 18, he said, the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. And we which are alive and remain will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. Now I want you to look at 1 Corinthians, she'll put it on the screen, 15, verse 51. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. Now that's not the batting of an eye. Your eye is like a camera. It twinkles, I forget how many thousands of times a second. In the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. When is he coming? In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Why? He goes on to explain, because flesh can't go to heaven. So you're going to drop your flesh, and your spirit's going to rise to meet the Lord in the air. Now, God gave Israel 7 feast days. And these 7 feast days, they're called high holy days or high Sabbaths. They had the regular Sabbath on Saturday. They had a high Sabbath 7 times a year. But these 7 feast days provide a complete sequence of prophetic events. Passover begins at sundown on the 13th of Nisan, which is the first month of the Jewish year. Now you understand, the Jewish year is determined by the moons. They have 28 days of every month. It's called the moon cycle. They have a 360-day year. And it involved 3 feast days. That one feast, Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. 7 days after Passover, they had what was called the Feast of First Fruits. Now, the first fruits, that's what we call Easter, the resurrection. 50 days after first fruits, they have the Feast of Pentecost. 50 days later. That's what Pentecost means. It means 50. It's the 50th day. 50th day after Passover, they had Pentecost. Now, I'm going to show you next Sunday how the first 4 feasts are fulfilled in Christ and His church. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and Pentecost were all fulfilled to the very day and the hour in Christ, in His death, burial, and resurrection, and the beginning of the church. Okay, first Passover, death. Unleavened bread, I'll explain it next week. Burial. And first fruits, resurrection. That's the day we celebrate Easter, the resurrection of Christ. Now they come at different days and different hours. You cannot know the day or the hour. But you can know what time of the year and the season of the year that it's going to happen. Happens in the spring every year. So, that's what he's talking about. Then 50 days later, Feast of Pentecost, that is the birth of the church. I'll show you how these all work. They were all fulfilled, and I believe that the last 3 trumpets, the last 3 feasts, the Feast of Trumpets, sounding of the trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, will be fulfilled right down to the very day and the hour. But the thing is, you cannot know the day and the hour that it's going to come because it changes every year. But you can know the times and you can know the season. Are you breathing? Yes. If the first 4 was fulfilled to the very hour and the day, why would anyone not assume and believe that the last 3 would also be fulfilled in Christ to the exact times and season? The 7 feasts link Daniel's 69th week, which was the cutting off of Messiah, to Daniel's 70th week, which is the tribulation. 7 years tribulation. Now, the first 4 feasts show the death, the burial and resurrection of Jesus, and the establishing of His church on the day of Pentecost. That was where it all started. The last 3 signify the rapture, the beginning of the tribulation, and the battle of Armageddon. That's when God gathers His people, His final harvest of His people, Israel, that has been preserved through the tribulation and the beginning of what's called the millennial reign, the 1,000 years when Christ will rule on this earth. Colossians 2, he's talking about people being judged. Some say you couldn't eat certain meats, you couldn't do this. They were judging you. He said, don't let anybody judge you because of eating meats or by the moons or the holy days. Why did he put moons in there? Because the holy days were determined by the moon. At a certain time of the year, they started their feast days. Am I losing you? He said, they are all of these holy days were nothing but a shadow of things to come. Now, if there is a shadow, there has to be somewhere a substance to cast a shadow. You cannot have a shadow unless you have a substance that casts the shadow. A shadow cannot cast a shadow. It has to be a substance. Jesus, listen, Jesus was the substance that cast the shadow. The feast days all pointed to Jesus. Do you understand that? The first 3 feast days gives us a shadow of Jesus to show His death, His burial, and His resurrection. And it will become so clear when we celebrate the Passover, how clear it becomes. The next 2 feasts, now first 3 is dedicated to Jesus, death, burial, and resurrection. The next 2 feasts are the Feast of Pentecost and Trumpets. That was given to the church to show its beginning and its ending, the birth and the rapture of the church. Do you see that? The last 2, the Day of Atonement and Tabernacles, that's given to Israel. On the Day of Atonement, the Antichrist signs a peace of treaty with Israel to start the beginning of Daniel's 70th week, the 7 years of tribulation. On Tabernacles, Israel is recognized that Jesus is the Messiah. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. I'm going to read you this. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. I want to show you this. Now, all of these things happened unto them for in samples or types. All of these things, these holy days, they were a type of something that was to come. And they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. It's written for those that at the end of the world that see the things coming about the rapture. Now, Romans and Corinthians describe the last days as the whole creation groaning and travailing in pain, childbirth, waiting for the day of redemption. In 1 Thessalonians 5:3, he talked about, I'm going to go back and read that to you. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. And when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. As travail upon a woman with child. Now listen. Childbirth is painful. Now I know women say, that having a baby is painful. They say a man associates, if he has a cold, he thinks he's having birth. No comparison. No comparison. It's painful. It starts slow, and the intensity builds. And every woman who's pregnant knows that in about 9.5 months, that she is going to have a child. Now, the only problem is she can tell the time of year and she can tell the season, but she has no clue when the pains will begin. No clue when the day and the hour will start. So that's why he gives that as an example. Some teach, I know, I'm closing. that the church is not going to have to go through any hard times, no tribulation, not going to be any suffering, just sailing along, doing nothing like they usually do. Taking their Christianity with a grain of salt, not too serious about it. Just tripping along, no tribulation. And suddenly Jesus is going to come for us, and then all hell is going to break loose on the earth. That is deception. He warns us, don't be sleeping. You better be sober. You better be serious about looking, because you never know when he's coming. Childbirth is painful. It starts slowly, and the intensity builds. And if you think that the church is going to escape without going through some hard times, you're going to go through the childbirth experience before the rapture. It's not going to be fun. Now, you can call me a fool, call me crazy, call me a fanatic. I like the old guy that was carrying a sign, a sandwich sign on the front and sign on the back. On the front it said, "I'm a fool for Jesus." On the back it said, "Whose fool are you?" Now, you can call me a fool. You can even say about me like they said about the Apostle Paul. They said, "Paul, much learning hath made thee mad." Now, you can say that I'm mad. You can say that I've lost my mind, that I'm foolish. But we are now living in the greatest moment of human history. An event that the world has never experienced. That's when Jesus will descend from heaven, the trumpet will sound, the voice of the archangel, and he will call us out of here. The dead in Christ will come out of the graves first. And why do they go first? Because they got farther to go than we do. By the time they get out of the grave, we're going with them. We'll meet them in the air, and time shall be no more. That event, we're on the verge of that event. Now, I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know the day and the hour. And my purpose, listen, when the trumpet sounds, it's too late to make decisions then. If you're not prepared when that trumpet sounds, or if you've let your Christianity slip, and some of you listening to me, there was a time when you were on fire for God. You were faithful, you were committed. But over the years, you've let your Christianity slip. Now, my purpose is not to frighten you. My purpose is to inform you. And if this message troubles you, then you need to set your house in order. You need to get things ready.